And yet the scepticism isn't going away. We've seen reports in the Weekend Australian last week about sea level rises not apparently being as dramatic as they were, and we've also seen a mutiny in the Liberal Party as to whether global warming is caused by human beings or solely caused by humans.
Yeah. So I mean, to take the sea level rise one first, I mean, I'd have to say that the use of data there is a bit inaccurate. I mean, there's some very good scientific data now about the rates of sea level rise. Here in Australia, we have John Church, who is, you know, the gold standard internationally of sea level rise measurements and understanding, and really not taking his advice is like having heart surgery and choosing to have a chiropractor give it to you instead of your best possible surgeon. And so, I mean, I put a lot more trust in John Church's views on this than the newspaper editors. On the broader sort of political front, I think the narrative somewhat has been lost at the moment, which is that we've got, even if you're not 100% convinced by all of these arguments, and it's fair enough to have a little bit of scepticism there, or a little bit of critical assessment, shall I say, but even if you're not totally convinced, then the balance of probabilities through, you know, by far again the gold standard process we have in science for assessing these things, the IPCC process. The indications of that is that there's a very high probability that we're going to have this climate change set of issues, and so, you know, in all sorts of other areas, in growing populations, so we should have people stay at work longer. In all sorts of other areas where we don't have 100% confidence, but we know there's a quite high probability of something, policymakers make decisions with a fair degree of uncertainty. For some reason, the narrative's been turned around the other way in the climate situation, so where we have a potential catastrophe on our hands, instead of taking a precautionary approach to it, we're taking a let's not do anything about it approach. And I find that very strange, and I don't think the population at large accepts that.
But even with among the scientists who do totally support anthropogenic global warming,
yep,
there seems to be some difference of opinion about what is the actual trajectory. I mean, it does appear that temperatures have levelled off since their peaks, well, according to a lot of people and according to some of the graphs. And then some people are saying, well, yes, the temperatures will cool down or they'll stay where they are for 10 years and then we're looking at another increase. I mean, I'm struck by that just level of doubt as to what's actually going to happen. And yet we're told that the science is settled constantly. I mean,
yeah,
from the public point of view, it's a hard thing to sell sometimes, isn't it?
Well, I understand what you're saying, and I understand why that causes confusion. But again, if you step back to the sort of best internationally accredited approach for assessing these things, which takes account of all of those issues, then you still get the message that the very, very strong consensus with very heavy levels of refereeing and peer assessment is that the change is happening. And when you look at the temperature thing in particular, it's true that the last 3 years have been a bit cooler than the previous one, but then that was a particularly hot year. And if you have a series of climate variability, then of course you're going to have periods in which it goes down a little bit and then goes up again. And it's like having a cool day in spring. Just because you have a couple of cool days in spring, you don't say, oh well, obviously summer's not coming. What you say is we've just got a bit of variability in the day-to-day sort of stuff, and that's what's happening with the temperature record. If you look at the temperature record over a 30-40 year period, it is just completely impossible to look at it and not believe that there's an increase in temperature happening at the moment, really.
Well, the other thing, I don't know whether you want to go into this, but the other thing, of course, is that people say that we have the climate's warmed, that has warmed in the past.
Yeah.
We had a medieval warm period. The hockey sticks come in for a great deal of attack in
Yep.
terms of the evidence that was used to sustain that. You know, and yet at the same time people are being told that it's almost treasonous to raise these things and to question it.
Yeah.
Do you think it is treasonous? I mean, have we all got to be resolved and agree that there is anthropogenic global warming and move forward from that? Is that the only way?
Yeah.
Or can we somehow live with our differences and resolve that there's a way forward according to best practice?
Yeah, I think I don't think it's treasonous to question. I don't think it's treasonous to question any science. I think it's very important to question science, and indeed the very basis of science is to move forward on being critiqued. What is not very helpful, though, is questioning stuff which has actually been settled. And so So things like this temperature debate, for example, or the issue that you raised about the medieval warming being an example of warming happening which clearly wasn't caused by anthropogenic impacts, those things have all been long settled and are quite clearly, there's plenty of places you can look for evidence on that, and it's very unhelpful and if anything pernicious and perhaps not treasonous but getting close to it, to go back and rehash arguments there where they really have been dealt with and they really have been settled. So the medieval warming, for example, we know very well that there was a combination of changes in the solar output and a number of other things at that time, which the models show would have caused something very like the medieval warming. We know that that happened in the first, something similar happened in the first part of the 20th century too, which likewise had a period of warming which looks a little bit like the beginnings of what we're seeing today. But those factors aren't operating today. The solar constant's been pretty constant, the solar output, and all the other things. And you know, all of these things have been rightly raised, and they have been looked at and worried over by scientists, and essentially dealt with and dismissed or incorporated into models and improved the models thanks to that. So the thing which is, we don't have to have groupthink, but we need critique of what's going on. But scurrilous critique is not helpful. The best integrated reason we have for being confident that it's an anthropogenic effect, that it's actually man-made or human-caused, is that we have models now which can simulate these long-term things. They can simulate the changes that have happened in previous centuries, and if you run them today without the human component of putting things into the atmosphere, then you get a prediction of a climate which is fairly stable. I mean, it varies a bit, but but we're now at a point where there is a huge divergence in the expected temperature of the globe between running the models with the human-induced extra impact put in there and doing it without. So we're actually at a point where the models don't work if we don't include the human component. So we can be pretty confident that human component is driving this change.
We're talking about models, though, are we, or are we talking about?
We're talking about models, not one model, but a whole suite of different approaches, a whole set of fingerprints, if you like, that in different ways converge on the same assessment.
So how important is, for example, this is one contentious issue, I don't know whether you think it's been settled, but the amplification of water vapour. I mean, we're just talking about, in the first place, that carbon dioxide, doubling the amount of carbon dioxide would only, in theory, push the temperature up by 0.5 degree, but it's the amplification caused, as I understand it, caused by water vapour, and yet that itself is contentious, whether that will happen or whether there are feedback effects that would actually decrease that effect. Is that settled?
Well, there's certainly complex feedbacks in cloud and things like that, and aerosols. But the actual effect of water vapour acting as an amplification of the CO2 effect, of course, is completely correct. That's the process by which it happens. It's just that it's the CO2 that we're putting into the atmosphere. It's not the water vapour. We're affecting the CO2. But you know, there's a broader issue with this, which is that it's possible to, it's a complex set of things, of course, and it's possible to tackle all sorts of little minutiae here, there or everywhere, and it's very hard for one person who you might be interviewing to be completely across the detailed explanation in every single area. And behind it all, you know, I fall back on saying that there's this process. Our whole daily lives are based on the scientific method, essentially. Whether or not the car that drove us here is safe, how the disc brakes were designed, all sorts of things there, they're all based on essentially a peer-reviewed process where you have science developing an approach and gradually making it better and better until we're happy to use it. It is sitting in a chair, whether or not it's got a safety, whether it's safe for you to sit in, is all based on that. If you're using your phone, if you're using the toaster at home, you are. So it's exactly the same process, but if anything done more seriously, that has led to the IPCC opinions, and it's the IPCC findings, and it's involved a whole set of experts, you know, thousands of scientists who've worked in this area, brought their information together. The synthesis itself's been peer reviewed, it's been exposed to governments, it's been exposed to comment from all sorts of places, and it's pretty reliable. If you want to dismiss it, this is the process issue. If you want to dismiss that, then you need to go and live in a cave, because almost everything you use every day is going to fall apart on your disbelief.
But I mean, there are scientists who have challenged it, aren't there? There are, and they've written books about it, and there are climatologists who've challenged it. But I mean, we could go down that road and we'd be here a long time.
We would.